wise but nonetheless annoying types. Let's take a look at some behavior patterns that might seem like subcategories of some of the types I've already discussed. In reality, these are people whose bad habits have led them to adopt some harmful patterns. Sometimes that's all there is to it, of course. We all run the risk of falling into an unflattering habit and behaving in ways that might cause headaches for other people. If I experience too much stress in my everyday life, I tend to come home from work and lose my temper over the tiniest things. If my back aches, I might get grouchy over nothing, and if I'm very worried about what the doctor might have to tell me, I can become impossible to deal with. Maybe I'm the kind of person who isn't very tolerant of bad news. I have a way of going on about things that frustrate me without really noticing. Most of these things can be solved with a good conversation and perhaps some therapy, but they're far removed from anything that would merit a proper diagnosis. Despite this, my behavior on my worst days is enough to drain my partner, my colleagues, or my children of their energy. Let's take a look at some common energy vampires you can probably learn to handle just fine on your own. The whiner. As the label suggests, this is somebody who always finds something to whine or complain about. They seem to be constantly on the lookout for flaws and will soon chew the ears off of anybody who will listen. Whatever happens, they will always find some reason to voice their discontent. Another suitable label for the whiner would be incurable pessimist. Deep down, the whiner is just like you or me, but has simply ended up in a downward spiral of general dissatisfaction. These dedicated complainers have trained themselves to presume that something is going to go wrong and that problems will be coming back to bite them. The whiners, however, shouldn't be conflated with the martyrs who are more consumed with their own personal misfortunes. Whiners, on the other hand, simply possess a natural knack for finding external things to be unhappy about. When you go to dinner with a whiner, you can expect trouble before you've even reached the restaurant. If you're driving, they wouldn't like your parking spot. It's too narrow. If your companion is driving, what if somebody opens their door too hard and hits your companion's car? However, they would move the car. They just leave it there. A perfectionist would have kept looking for a better spot, but whiners are really only looking for a chance to voice some displeasure. This is simply their way of communicating. Once you've parked, the walk to the restaurant is too long and they're wearing the wrong shoes. Besides, somebody stole their gloves and now their fingers are cold. They might be too cold to even hold a fork and knife. When you enter the restaurant, they'll look around and when you exclaim that it looks lovely, they'll tell you they've seen better. The inner pessimist will assume that things are about to take a turn for the worse. They vividly remember a past restaurant dinner, a lukewarm piece of fish and lumpy sauce, or some cut of meat that wasn't properly cooked. Oh well, you sit down to eat and you try to keep your spirits high, but the complaints keep coming. Their chair isn't very comfortable, their boss is an idiot, and they hate their job. Not that they're going to look for a new one. That would leave them with nothing to whine about. When the food arrives, they forget to thank the waitress, who's already starting to look annoyed. You're having misgivings about this dinner before it's really started, and you're wondering how you could be naive enough to believe the whiner would have changed since your previous dutiful dinner last year. This is the same miserable sourpuss you took out for their birthday dinner every year. Had you really forgotten? Oh well, the wine list is too short, too long, or too expensive. When the whiner decides to order a bottle of the house red, it's too warm, too tasteless, or too dry. You'll point out that they're free to choose another, better wine, but this is where the interesting psychology of the incessant complainer kicks in. They don't want to order better wine. They want to have something to complain about. What makes somebody a whiner who's never happy about anything? The core causes are very difficult to identify, but somewhere along the line, you can be certain that this person has adopted an unfortunate habit of actively looking for problems. Just like many of the other energy vampires, these people aren't fully aware of their own behavior. What we have here is a person who's probably healthy and completely normal, but who suffers from poor self-awareness and is, for all intents and purposes, stuck in this behavior. The effects of hanging up the phone. Being around somebody who whines constantly can be exhausting. This is the opposite of positive thinking. It would certainly be satisfying to adopt a dramatic outlook on life for a while. The advantage of positive thinking, after all, is that it's precisely that. Positive. Personally, I reckon that even if positive thinking wouldn't solve all problems, or even close to all, it still works out better than negative thinking most of the time. Although a negative focus can help us avoid problems, it can be extremely draining for everyone else to listen to all the various things that might go wrong. When we focus exclusively on problems and ignore all the opportunities that come our way, we essentially lose our focus. Nobody wants to wander around in a negative goo. It will eventually crumble any hope for a brighter future and leave us with no reason to carry on. Maybe it's time we simply gave up. You can reason with them, certainly, and you could plausibly voice what's going on, but it'll wear on your mood. Do you want this individual whom you do care about, after all? It could be your parent, partner, good friend, or colleague, to snap out of it? Or would you rather just rid yourself of them and move on with your own sunny, happy life? The latter option is the simplest, of course. You call the whiner and explain that their constant complaining is taking too much of a toll on you, and if you're going to be staying in touch, they'd better shape up right now. Or else hang up. Now it's all up to them. Seem harsh? Maybe it is. But in the end, you can't take responsibility for somebody else's attitude. Your own attitude, however, is your own responsibility. And I know plenty of people who have severed relations with people who kept draining them of energy through their tiresome, whiny behavior. You're entitled to feel that way. There's no need to be rude about it, but you're not responsible for the way this person behaves. But suppose it's a close relationship, one that you don't want to ruin. If you have a parent who's grouchy and negative and keeps ruining the mood all day long and you still live at home, then what options do you really have? Or suppose you have a friend whom you've noticed a change in recently, somebody who isn't usually that negative but is going through some kind of phase. In those situations, you might want to help and support them. That would be noble of you. Here are some simple steps for you to follow. 1. Confront them. Explain that their constant whining and complaining is harming and or ruining your relationship. 2. Explain to them that you'd like to continue spending time with them, but that some changes will be necessary if it's not going to be too costly to you in terms of energy. 3. Explain exactly which behaviors are problematic for you and how. For example, tell them, when you keep complaining about how boring work is, it makes me lose my focus, which impacts my performance. Do you really want that? Note the importance of this question. Without it, you would be a whiner, wouldn't you? 4. Help them by giving them some good advice. Explain that rather than complain about X or Y, they should do something to improve their situation. If their job is boring, they should get a different job, or ask their boss for a change of assignment. 5. Ask them to comment on what you just said. Now, usually it's unlikely to be this simple. You may have to repeat the steps many times before the person in question manages to break their whiny habits. But there is hope. Be aware that whining and complaining is usually only done by people who believe that things could be better. Complaining about your partner is a common pastime, as you know. Sometimes there is good reason for the complaint, but the complaints reflect a belief that there could be someone better out there. If their partner was the last person on earth, it seems doubtful that the complaints would be as intense. Also, and I'm not sure if I should actually recommend this or not, perhaps you could ask somebody who's whining about their partner this question. Are you absolutely sure that you're perfect yourself? The walking disaster. Somebody who keeps running into problems, often rather unusual ones. The kind of person who seems to keep wandering into trouble through no fault of their own. An individual who doesn't shift blame. Instead, they accept responsibility for everything that happens or doesn't happen. Essentially, a good-hearted person. A helpful soul who gives their own energy until it runs out. The innocent energy vampires are basically only energy vampires to the people who are closest to them. They help others freely, but at the same time, they seem to keep suffering constant mishaps for some reason. They say yes to any request without considering it for a second, if perhaps it would have been wiser to say something else. No, for instance. They'll help others before they help themselves. Occasionally, they're helpless individuals who actually need to help themselves. And other times, they're good friends who place too much trust in you. They have a fundamentally positive outlook on everything and everyone, and they have a hard time imagining that there might be evil people in the world. They lend others their tools and never give them back. They answer the question about their weaknesses completely honestly in job interviews. While everybody else has learned from clever consultants to dress up a strength as a weakness to make themselves look good, they honestly and sincerely own up to getting anxious when their workload gets too intense. They promise to help their neighbor build a fence without finding out if it's 15 or 1500 feet long first. They will confide in a colleague about how they intend to apply for an open position and then proceed to be outmaneuvered for it by the very same colleague. When a good friend asks for some help hosting a party, they end up spending the entire night working in the kitchen. Their basic naivety makes them very easy targets for anybody who's prepared to use subterfuge to exploit them. They have no capacity for self-interest. In some bizarre way, they manage to think the best of everybody and suffer one setback after another as a result. Naive? Could be. It's easy to think of these people as genuine victims. I went over the opposite of this in the chapter on eternal victims, and although I'm not very fond of the idea of labeling people as victims, I wonder if it might be appropriate in this case. But at the same time, it seems reasonable to ask, victims of what exactly? A cruel world in which callous people actively exploit one another? Or their own all too naive attitudes to these people? When I've discussed this with psychologists and psychotherapists and listened to their explanations, a slightly different picture has emerged. Walking disasters are, basically, very appealing targets for people who improve their lives by exploiting others, whether they do it intentionally or not. So what exactly are we dealing with here? And how is this type of person an energy vampire? I mean, what could be better than a person who is so happy and willing to sacrifice themselves for somebody else? Isn't this a good thing? Isn't it noble and worthy of admiration? Well, it's not quite that simple. When I write each of my books, I test my thoughts and ideas in a group of people I trust completely to see which ones are useful and which ones might be based on misunderstandings on my part. I do this before I write a single word. When I discussed the concept of the walking disaster with the people who made up my test panel, the topic of good and bad luck came up. Somebody suggested that we might have to accept that some people are simply less fortunate than others and that there is nothing else to it. However, it's not really about bad luck or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's actually about the fact that there are a number of individuals out there who have a knack for sniffing these people out and exploiting them shamelessly. In the long run, this will impact those who are closest to them the most. That could be you or me. Good versus bad luck. Let's explore this in more detail. If you believe in bad luck, that would simply imply that you also believe in good luck. It's certainly an exciting thought, the vague idea that the universe, chance, or karma strikes more in some people's lives than in others. However, that would also mean that good luck happens, well, completely randomly. But that's not the case. There is no proof of this, basically. Most people who have been successful in anything will, at some point, be told that they've been lucky. The tech billionaire who started out with $1 million he inherited from his family with a lucky break he had. But honestly, if your mother left you $1 million, would you really manage to turn it into $1 billion? The athlete who wins every race, how lucky she is to have been born with that talent. Well, whether he's talented or not, she's almost certainly put in more time training than her competitors. We're all born with talents in various disciplines, but very few of us make the decision to nurture that talent to the best of our ability. One of my favorite examples is a quote widely attributed to Ray Kroc, the man who purchased McDonald's in the 60s and turned it into the global franchise that it is today. Luck is a dividend of sweat. The more you sweat, the luckier you get. Kroc undoubtedly did pretty well for himself. What you think of Ray Kroc or McDonald's has nothing to do with the idea of good luck. Back to the walking disaster. You might be thinking that this is still just somebody who happens to suffer more misfortunes than others. They keep getting hurt, they keep losing their luggage, they keep getting their cars scratched in IKEA parking lots. However, you should rethink that. If you have a habit of wandering around dark parking lots in bad neighborhoods with a Rolex on your wrist looking for your brand new sports car, you don't get to complain if you suffer what might seem bad luck. When you inevitably end up getting mugged, it wouldn't be a total surprise. You were being both naive and oblivious. Some people might call you an idiot who was responsible for the whole situation. It's the same in a work setting. If you make a big announcement to management that you're going to handle some project without knowing what's actually involved, you could end up wrecking your career, and it won't have a thing to do with bad luck. It will come down to lacking experience and judgment. This could very well be what's going on with our friend the walking disaster. Energy vampires who drain themselves. These energy vampires live among us and appear to be just like everybody else. They have spouses, parents, children, and friends, just like the rest of us. And their loved ones end up having to watch what happens year after year. This can be extremely draining, to put it mildly, and that's the problem. What do you do about somebody who manages to single-handedly cause themselves an endless succession of problems but never sees their own part in any of this? What do you do when your good friend, partner, or daughter-in-law keeps pouring their energy into a massive personal black hole? And most important, What do you do when they keep having to turn to you when they need to replenish their energy? The immediate response is concern, not knowing what's going to happen next. What's next? What kind of problem are they going to get themselves into this week? Going around feeling constantly worried about somebody you care about can be a huge drain. One man I spoke to said that he was fully prepared to protect his partner from external dangers. But how was he going to protect her from herself? Her naivety got her in trouble every day of the week. How long can this go on before you say you've had enough? How much of themselves are people supposed to sacrifice needlessly before their loved ones draw the line? Should you respond if somebody is heading for destruction without even knowing it? These questions are hardly relevant, since somebody who's always giving away pieces of themselves will eventually run out of self to offer their loved ones. It's a beautiful thought, of course. This entirely unselfish individual who never reflects on their own needs before committing to helping others. Isn't that the kind of person the world could use more of? Like the familiar safety precaution says, put on your own oxygen mask before you help anybody else. That is basically a warning that if you sacrifice everything for others, you will lose yourself. And was that really the goal? If you get used by others regularly, the usual suspects will be the narcissists and the bullies out there. The reason could be poor self-esteem. This can be helped, of course, but that's probably best left to professionals. It'll take time, and I would recommend anybody who lacks the proper training to help find their friends a reputable therapist for treatment. Compare it to stopping when you spot a car with its hood open on the highway. If you're a mechanic who's trained to work on the specific make of a car, you could actually do some real good. If not, you'd be better off towing the unfortunate driver's vehicle to the nearest garage. That's another way of doing good. The know-it-all. Somebody who gives advice all the time and interferes with what others are doing. They insert themselves into things uninvited. They always know better than everyone else, and they think they have the power to answer everything. They happen to be experts at every subject. Admit it, you've done it yourself. You've given unsolicited advice to people. In your case, and in mine of course, it was a genuinely good-natured act. We really wanted to help and explain something to whoever. But when other people do this, how annoying is it to have to listen to good advice you never asked for? Know-it-alls generously share their opinions with others and will give lengthy accounts of their vast knowledge of everything on earth. They know the best way to cut the lawn, they know all about Argentinian wines, and they happen to be experts on Chinese history, Italian politics, segregation in North Korea, and the Australian automotive industry. All of that knowledge in one person. It hardly seems believable. But there's more. Since they feel that they know best, they will occasionally also want to tell you, me, and everybody else what we ought to do in situation X, Y, or Z. They'll get involved when we're building a patio behind the house, explaining how the dimensions look wrong to them, and they won't hesitate to walk up to the woman at the gym who's obviously spent years building muscle to point out the flaws in a squatting technique, even if they haven't ever touched a dumbbell. When you're working, there's always another, better way you should be doing it. When you're raising children, know-it-alls will be happy to tell you about how you should be doing it according to A, B, or C. It simply never ends. How to circumvent a know-it-all. Some of these people are definitely the type I described in the chapter on habitual perfectionists. They can't help pointing it out when they perceive something to be incorrect. Others are simply yellow individuals who can't help thinking out loud. They don't mean any harm and they tend to forget all about it. Others are genuinely trying to be helpful and actually want to do some good. Perhaps they're exhibiting what's known as social drive. The reason behind their annoying behavior is important, particularly when you're deciding exactly how enraged to get. If this person is genuinely trying to help you in the way that seems best to them, that's one thing, as opposed to when people just want to interfere and dominate others. However, the problem these self-appointed advisors pose is really quite simple to solve. Except for your boss, whose advice you presumably have to follow. You'll find the only genuine obstacle in the mirror. Think about it. If somebody tries to change what you're doing or not doing, why do you care at all about what they have to say? If you'd never seek advice from this person, why would you listen to them when they try to involve themselves in your affairs uninvited? Ignore what I told you earlier. Most of us simply dislike being told what to do. This is particularly true in situations where we already feel that we are in control. I think many people will accept advice and listen and nod out of pure courtesy. That's how I personally respond to tips I get from amateurs whose opinions don't really matter to me. When somebody who's never been on stage tries to tell me how I ought to give my lectures, while I've spoken to hundreds of thousands of people over the last 2 decades, I nod and then I switch off. But I wouldn't if the person in question happens to have more experience than I do. That would be completely different. Or when dreamers who would like to write a book try to convince me that it helps your writing to have a few drinks first because they read this somewhere. I was actually given this advice by a group of people years ago, half of whom admitted that they didn't even read books. I don't engage. There's really no need to respond to half-baked ideas like that. Others might feel less sure about this and believe all advice to be well-meaning. Let's dispel that illusion right now. If you're not feeling confident about something, you might want to have your approach confirmed. But that doesn't mean you should be entertaining ideas from people who actually have nothing to do with it. No, you'll have to decide what to do about the persistent know-it-all. There are a few different options here. Ignore them, thank them but ignore their advice, confront them about not minding their own business. The most entertaining option, of course, is confrontation. It can be both invigorating and educational. It's also rife with opportunities for potentially growth-inducing conflict. Further, it offers a chance to interrupt an unfortunate pattern in which your neighbor keeps lobbing pointless advice over the fence. Here's what you might say. Why exactly are you giving me that advice? Do you not trust me to know how to handle my own business? Here's a line I've used for years with great success. What would you like me to do with this information? You could also tell them that you'll get in touch if your current approach doesn't work. Alternatively, you could demand that they show you their credentials in the field in question and make it clear that if they don't, you wouldn't pay any attention to their suggestion. I like the sign of that one. I'll have to try it myself. If you have time to spare, you could also mirror their behavior. Head over to your neighbor's place and show him how to do stuff. Snatch the lawn trimmer from his hands and give him a lesson on how to reach the awkward spots underneath the shrubs. If you're lucky, he might realize his mistake and the two of you will bond over a couple of beers instead. If he's annoyed that you're interfering, you could always tell him you're glad he knows how it feels. Then ask him to keep quiet from then on. It might sound blunt, but it's actually surprisingly effective. Sometimes you simply need to call this behavior out. Most normal people will see what they did. If you're lucky, they might even laugh at themselves for it. Remember, most know-it-alls aren't really trying to stir anything up. They simply have an unappealing urge to intervene. Set boundaries for what you're willing to accept, and stick to them. The most complicated energy vampire of all. I'm about to take a pretty serious risk here, and it's entirely possible this book will soon be crashing through your nearest window. We'll see how it goes, I guess. But let's be honest here, just you and me. Sometimes you'll lose energy, focus, and motivation for a very simple reason. You don't really know what you're doing. You don't see your own flaws and shortcomings, and you're unaware of the ways your behavior impacts your own energy levels. Don't feel bad. We all have our less flattering qualities. That's true of me, you, and everybody you ever met or will ever meet. We're in good company, and life involves so much more than trying to monitor your own thoughts and actions. Who has time for that kind of thing? Stick with me though, and you'll find out that there are enormous benefits to paying a little more attention. Many of the things we do are done purely out of habit. This goes for good things, less good things, and genuinely harmful things. They just happen. Sometimes you'll be in a hurry to leave your house. You're late for a train, or your whole family is already waiting in the car. Whatever the reason, the last thing you want to be doing at the moment is looking for your keys. That was me for so many years. I'm usually a pretty organized person, but for some reason, my keys kept disappearing whenever I was in a hurry. You know what it can be like. You run around your home like a lunatic, pulling out drawers, rummaging through all your pockets, some of which require at least 5 searches before you can be fully confident that your keys aren't in there somewhere. Sometimes you look in the pockets of a jacket you haven't even worn in 3 years. Perhaps somehow your keys have magically teleported themselves to your old winter coat from 2010. The problem isn't so much the keys as the effect frantically looking for them like this has on you and your mood. When those blasted keys finally materialize, usually on some table you've already searched 15 times while muttering the most appalling curses under your breath, your positive energy will be completely gone. If you're not incredibly stressed, you're probably actively enraged. When you finally sit down behind the wheel, your whole family can tell that a live grenade just hopped in the car. That used to happen to me a lot. It wasn't fun at all. Until the day I did something very simple. I nailed up a key hook in the hall. Next, I made a habit of always hanging my keys up in that specific place every time I walked through the door. That way, I would always know where my keys were the next time I was about to walk back out through the same door. My point is that we all have unexamined habits that disrupt our energy in everyday life, rob us of our focus, and bring our moods down to dangerous levels. And in the end, who suffers? Exactly. Our loved ones. They're the ones who have to witness outburst after outburst when we've lost it over something we did to ourselves. It's not a good look, my friend. So spend some time considering these moments and see if there's something you could do to avoid losing energy and motivation at the wrong times. Some of these will be simple, while others are more complex. I'm not suggesting that this list is comprehensive, but we've got to start somewhere. If you haven't already been taking notes while reading, this is the time to start. The most effective tool. A highly effective way to lose energy in the moment is to get into an argument with somebody. You know, all those times when you realize that you've completely misjudged a situation or just made a fool out of yourself by being you. People you actually like a great deal turn their backs on you, and all you did was be yourself. If you honestly can't recall any situations like that, you'll need to start paying closer attention right now. I'm sure you've heard the expression, no pain, no gain. It's often used in contexts related to physical training, but there are other situations that might also be quite painful, yet worth the effort. One of the most important characteristics for success is self-awareness. In fact, with strong, solid self-awareness, there's very little you can't achieve. Self-awareness is everything. Why is this though? Why is self-awareness one of the most powerful tools you have for achieving your dreams and goals? Also, what happens to people who don't cultivate self-awareness? What problems can that cause? We've all been in a meeting where we find ourselves gradually coming to the realization that nobody actually understands what's going on. Everybody else is talking and nobody is listening. The only exception is the folks who are staying completely silent instead. When you leave the meeting, all you can think is, what's wrong with all these people? Other examples would be when your partner is simply refusing to listen to you, or when you realize that some people just can't seem to understand what you're saying no matter how clearly you speak to them. If only they could all be more like you. Sometimes you'll feel like you're surrounded by idiots. Interestingly enough, it seems to me that some of us are surrounded by more idiots than others. On the other hand, when you think of how difficult it can be to change yourself, it might seem futile to even try to change everybody else. Is that really what social skills are all about? Of course it isn't. Trying to change everybody else is pointless. Between you and me, it's also pretty naive. What constitutes social excellence then? The ability to understand and predict the reactions others will have to your own behavior. We all influence one another all the time. Your actions influence the actions of others all the time. And this is the key to success. If you can figure out ahead of time what the person you're communicating with will do if you do X, Y, or Z, you will have good social skills. The more often you get this right, the more probable it is that you're socially adept. Naturally, it would be even better if you weren't guessing at all, but actually knew what you were doing. Getting along well with others, regardless of who they are or how they behave. Understanding and predicting the reactions your own behavior will elicit from others. That's the solution. The importance of self-awareness. If you take a closer look, you'll soon realize that the concept of social skills actually hinges on just one trait: self-awareness. In order to know how people will react to the things you say and do, you'll need to know how they will be perceived by others. You need to understand yourself. That's the key. Self-awareness provides social skills, which in turn make you a good communicator. What is self-awareness then? If we understood this concept better, we might find it easier to acquire the magical knowledge. Self-awareness is actually composed of several things. 1. The ability to see yourself clearly. 2. An understanding of who you really are. And 3. An understanding of how you're perceived by others. When you look in the mirror, do you see what the rest of us see? Are you sure about that? What difference does what you think actually make? I am what I am, and that's okay? Well, certainly. You can always wander around being just the way you are. It's an option. You're perfectly entitled to be precisely the way you are and act the way you see fit. But you should know that there will be consequences, and you might not like them. Self-awareness provides social skills which make you a good communicator. Now we finally arrived at the most valuable secret of all, the value of effective communication.